You understand deposits already, but where does this interest come from? And what about borrowers? Where do they get their money from? Now, we are going to tell you all about borrowers and loans. Borrowing from a bank versus Aave. First, we are going to tell you the difference of mechanism between borrowing from a bank versus from Aave. To borrow on Aave works differently than borrowing with a bank. This is because the money you borrow from a bank is created out of thin air. Yes, literally. When you take a loan from the bank, they create the money and give it to you. On the other hand, when you borrow from Aave, the crypto you receive comes from the money pool of depositors, which, as explained, keep their crypto in Aave's smart contracts because they receive interest on their deposits. This means that when you borrow from Aave, you are using depositors' money, and you need to do two very important things. Number 1, be over-collateralized. We'll explain this in a moment. And 2, when you pay back the loan, you also have to pay interest, which is normally between 2 to 3%. Interest rates. There are two types of interest rates, variable and stable. The variable interest rate is determined based on supply and demand in the specific money pool you are borrowing from. It fluctuates over time, and the higher the utilization rate is, the higher the interest borrowers have to pay. The interest rate mechanism works like this. When very few people are borrowing an asset, the interest rate for that asset is very low, which encourages more people to borrow it and less people to supply to it. This increases the utilization rate, which in turn increases the interest rate. And when many people are borrowing an asset, the interest rate for that asset is very high, which incentivizes people to borrow less of it and more people to supply to that pool, effectively decreasing the utilization rate and interest rate. This self-optimizing model is intended to bring stability to the system, and so far has worked very well. The stable rate is the average variable interest rate for the last 30 days, so it also fluctuates over time, but less. Over-collateralized concept. Over-collateralized? This means that to borrow from Aave's money pools, you first have to deposit crypto into Aave, and your deposits must always be more valuable than your borrows. You are now probably asking yourself two questions. Number 1, why would I want to borrow money if I already have more than I would borrow? And number 2, why does my loan need to be over-collateralized? We'll answer both. First, you'd want to take a loan on Aave if you are long on an asset and want to be entitled to its potential upside, but you want to have working capital which you can use for other things. Let's say you think Ether's value will grow and you want to benefit from holding Ether, but you also want to go to DEFCON and you only have money for one of them. Normally, you would have to decide, but with Aave, you could do both. This is a way you could go about it. Deposit 10 Ether into Aave and take a loan of 5,000 USDC, which you can use for paying the expenses of your trip to DEFCON. Aave allows you to keep your crypto and to have working capital to use in whatever you want. Second, your loan needs to be over-collateralized because that way, Aave can always pay depositors back. So now imagine what would be the risks if Aave loans were not over-collateralized. People could request loans without collateral and just keep the borrowed money, and since Aave doesn't require KYC and is permissionless, there is currently no way to ensure that the borrower will pay the loan. Having this model, where people can just take loans and never pay them, is obviously unsustainable and pointless. That is why Aave's loans must be over-collateralized.